Hello and welcome to this session where we're going to be talking about the What Hi-Fi test rooms and how we review. My name's Joe Cox and I'm the Content Director on What Hi-Fi, and I'm joined by Ket Ambradia, who is What Hi-Fi Technical Editor, and Tom Parsons, who is our TV and AV Editor. Now, both Ket and Tom are immensely experienced when it comes to what we do, with more than 30 years experience at least writing about consumer electronics. And with the lion's share of those spent on What Hi-Fi, so we're in safe hands. Product reviews are, of course, the foundation of everything we do, really, and the way we work is a little different to most other tech magazines and websites. So in this session, we're going to be talking you through the entire review process at What Hi-Fi, from the design of our test rooms, how we test, why we do it the way we do, and even some of our favourite test tracks and scenes. So let's dive straight in. First things first, Tom, why do we need test rooms?
That's a very good question. I mean, for starters, there's the sheer practicality of it. I mean, I don't know about most people, but you know, it's hard to find the space in one's home or flat for, you know, the space for, you know, testing two TVs side by side, or a home cinema package, or a projector, or even just having enough space for a good hi-fi system, which we know needs, you know, a lot of space. So there's the practicality of it, but we also, which we'll get into a lot more, I'm sure, you know, we review as a team, so we need a kind of central location where you know, the team reviewers can work collaboratively to test, and then second look, and then often third look products. You know, the way our collaborative approach is kind of fundamental to what we do. So, you know, it'd be no good us visiting one another's houses to second look products. I mean, maybe it would, but yes, certainly having central dedicated rooms is the it's the best way to do it. But also you get, I mean, arguably more importantly, you get that consistency by having dedicated rooms. We know how the rooms perform. They're set up specifically for the testing process, and by testing all of the products in the same space, we're achieving a level of consistency that most people don't. You know, and we feel that it helps us get to the core of a product and understand the product a lot better once we're testing in a room that we know and is consistent. And plus, yeah, sort of related to the space thing, you know, we do our testing, you know, our testing is based on testing products against benchmark products, against the very best products in that class. And so we need to have on hand numerous award-winning products from, you know, we have on hand at any time sort of 10 to 15 TVs, you know, 10 to 20 pairs of speakers. You know, having a central location with testing facilities and enough storage for all of those products is paramount. I mean, you just couldn't do that from home. And I mean, you know, most reviewers aren't in a position to be able to do that unless they're very lucky and have a huge amount of space.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So I guess a lot of what you're talking about there is consistency. And of course, this relates to the rooms that we're using to do the reviews. So on that subject, Ket, tell us a bit more about the test rooms themselves and what makes them fit for the purpose.
Okay, first of all, there's the practical situation. You know, our test rooms are in the middle of an office block, you know, where other people work who aren't on the same brand. So on a basic sort of not disturbing them level, we've got to make sure our rooms are soundproofed enough so nobody else in the office is disturbed. Now, if you've ever heard a subwoofer in full flow or pair of speakers really loud, it's really hard to keep that sound quiet and not transmitting. So we paid an awful lot of attention to get the basic structure of the room right. You know, a solid floor, walls which are thick enough and well damped enough to stop some sound from traveling through. Things like soundproof doors, you know, which are properly sealed so sound doesn't escape. All of those things matter. So that's the very basics. And then you move on to us trying to test in a consistent manner. And what that means is, we've got our own dedicated main supply. So we're in an office with hundreds of computers, which put an awful lot of noise through the main system. And, we've got a separate network which stops that noise coming through to whatever we're testing, because it's not really fair to expect anything we test, whether it's a television or an amplifier, to perform at its best with that much noise on the mains. Equally, we have our own dedicated mains internet feed for exactly the same reason. If we're trying to compare two televisions, watching 4K Netflix on both of them, the last thing you want is the picture to start freezing or just stop working properly because somebody else has decided to have a conference call. So those basic conditions have got to be right before we can even test.
And another popular question about the rooms is the sound signature that we're aiming for. And are we aiming for a particular sound? And what role does, I guess, acoustic treatment play in getting that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. The glib answer would be, we just want a typical room. We want something representative of what people have at home, so we can judge how equipment sounds like in the real world. The problem is there is no typical room. There are some people with wooden floors and big windows, a very sparse environment, which is much brighter and echoey than, say, a heavily furnished room with heavy curtains and thick sofas and all the rest of it. So what we came up with is what we feel is a good compromise. It's a medium-sized room. It's not massive. It's just about 3.5 meters wide, about 4 and a bit meters long. So that's broadly equal to most people's living room in Britain, at least. And we've got a certain amount of acoustic treatment, but that's only to get rid of the excesses of the room. Every room has a signature, and there's nothing you can do to get away from it. So what we're trying to do is reduce the most obvious blemishes of the signature. But beyond that, people are really good at getting used to things. And we work in our test rooms all the time. We listen to hundreds of products and look at hundreds of products over a year. And, the brain is great at just getting rid of the things that it doesn't think are important. So it doesn't take long for us to be able to filter out what the room's doing and actually focus on the product.
So I guess that's where that consistency comes into play again, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we mentioned at the start, Tom, this idea of testing as a team. How does that actually work in reality?
Yeah, that's again something that I think is different in the way we do things. So we have sort of editors in specific areas. So I cover the TV AV side of things, as you mentioned, and Becky Roberts is our hi-fi editor. And we and Ketan will decide which products we want to look at, essentially. And those products, they can come to us, they can be pitched at us, obviously, and we've constantly got people pitching their products at us, which is fantastic. But also, we can know from the traffic we do around news stories, which are the popular products that our readers want to see reviews of. And obviously, we can base it on sales and that kind of thing. But at this stage, we've got a pretty good feeling for what's going to do well and what our readers want to read about. So us editors will call a product in initially, and then it'll be allocated to a member of the review team. So that includes me and Becky and Ketan and you, Joe. But we've obviously got a team of dedicated reviewers as well. Now that person will kind of take charge of the review. Obviously getting the product in, ensuring we've got the benchmark product available, setting, the new product and the benchmark product up, getting a really good sense of what it's supposed to do. Basically, how's it being pitched at us? What does the company making it say this thing is going to do? What's special about this product? But also sometimes you've got to kind of put that to one side and because obviously a company or a PR is going to talk up a particular aspect that they might think is massive, but sometimes we've got a better sense of what's most important. So yeah, and they'll run through a full testing process, which can take days. Genuinely, we take a long time over this because we take it very seriously. Just setting up a product, can be very tricky, and it's not always as you'd really expect. I mean, Ket can go into this a lot more than I can, but a TV is obviously a very complex beast these days, because they just do so much, and there are so many settings to tweak in order to get the best out of it. But the same is true of a lot of hi-fi products. Speakers work differently based on where they are in the room, how close they are to a wall, how much toe you give them. And it can take a long time just to experiment and listen and watch to work out how the product needs to be set up and positioned in order to work its best. And we are determined that every product we get in is given its best chance to shine. So we don't just kind of, dump something in the room and go, right, let's just assume this is how it's supposed to work. And we don't just set up a TV and just leave it in its default settings. You've got to spend a long time working out how to get the very best out of the product so that it's got its best chance against this benchmark product. So that can take absolutely ages. From a couple of days to, I don't know, there are certainly products that have taken us a week to kind of test top to bottom. Now that reviewer, it's kind of their role to, they need to know the product inside out, but they also need to have a really strong sense of its pros and cons, and essentially, is it better than the benchmark product? What should the star rating be? And then that reviewer will look to often Ketan, or me, or Becky, or you, Joe, to come and do the second look or second listen. And that person will essentially kind of pitch their impression of the product. But the second look and second listen process, sort of ensures we're getting the right score, and we genuinely have got to call a product, because there are numerous factors that can mean that one person doesn't necessarily form the full and complete sort of opinion of a product. So yeah, it's a sort of long and, I wouldn't say arduous. Who doesn't want to spend 2 days listening to their favorite music on some of the best hi-fi, or watching movies on the latest OLED or QLED TVs? It's a great process to be involved in, but there is quite a lot of hard work involved in just tweaking a setting by 3 points, and making a note on how that does, and then trying another setting. So it's quite a long process.
Yeah, Tom, the other aspect about the second listen or look side of things is also consistency. If we're all human, and we have good days and bad days, and if you try and review a product when you've just had a miserable morning, you're going to have a real downer on that. It's inevitable. And similarly, you got a great day, everything sounds great, or everything looks great. And equally, the thing about being fair is important, because once again, we're all human. We have personal relationships. Actually, let me rephrase that. We know the PR people, companies. We know the engineers. Some of these people we've known for a very long time, and it's easy to be swayed by the fact that you get along with the lead engineer of a particular company, or you get along with the PR of another company, and that nobody does it on purpose. That's just human nature. And what the second look is there is to try and balance things out. If someone's been too negative about something, when I'm looking at a product, or when you look at a product, it's a case of saying, well, maybe it's not as bad as you think. Look at all these positive aspects, and we come up with a much more balanced, even-handed assessment of the product. And that's really important, because ultimately, we're just judging the product. We're not judging the company or its reputation or anything else. It's the product in front of us. We give it the best possible chance to shine. We compare it to other products that do similar things at similar prices to put it into some sort of context. And then we give our opinion of it. And it is only opinion. It's not law. It's opinion, but it's informed opinion, backed up by many years of experience. And then that's important.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you make, Ket, because I think our role is not to praise or criticize an individual or even a company. It's to ensure that our readers are pointed in the direction of the best products available for their money. And that is the most important thing. We understand the importance to the industry. We understand that people have put a huge amount of time into developing these products, and we have to appreciate that, and we do. But ultimately, a reader wants to know what's the best pair of speakers they can buy for £500, and or any number of other possible scenarios, the best TV for £2,000, whatever. But we're talking large, what are large sums of money for people, and our core responsibility is to help those people choose the best product for them. And that's much more important than whether this chap that you like, whether his latest speaker is any good or not. It's about helping the readers spend their money in the best possible way.
Yeah, exactly. And we take it seriously because we want to get to the right result and be fair and ultimately do the right thing for the reader, as you say. And I guess this is a good point to also mention the fact that one of the common questions we get and common misconceptions is the idea that we as an editorial team are influenced by the sales team or the commercial team. And I've said it before, and we've all said it a million times, but that just really isn't the case. The reason that we're in a great position where our reviews are really influential and people take our reviews really seriously is because we don't accept and aren't influenced by any outside factors. So it is really the case that, hand on heart, the editorial team, of course, we know some of our commercial team and we talk to them because we work in an office together, or we used to, but we're just not influenced by what's going on there, and they know that that's the case, and they don't try to influence things in any way. It's very much two separate teams, and the editorial team is allowed to get on with their business and do the right thing for the reader, essentially, which is great, and it's nice that we're in that position.
Yeah, I mean, we often make their jobs much harder for them because, regardless of what deals they may make for advertising in the magazine and on the website, it doesn't have any bearing whatsoever. We're usually not even aware of it, and we can and have then gone and, well, I wouldn't say panned a product, but given a product a negative review, and that's something that they just have to deal with. It's nothing to do with us. We're judging the product in front of us, and are, as I say, usually unaware of any stuff that the ads team and sales team are actually doing. And it's a great place to be in, but yeah, I do feel sorry for them at times.
So I guess that's the theory of how we test and how we do things. I guess another question we get a lot from readers and people in the industry is, what are we listening for or looking for when we test? And similarly, I think some people think that maybe the reviewers have golden ears or are doing something magical that nobody else could possibly do. Is that the case, Ketan? I feel that it probably isn't, but I mean, could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I haven't met anyone with golden ears yet. I hope to do so at some point. No, none of our hearing is particularly awesome or better than anybody else's. We're just normal people who just happen to have learned how to do the job and have got experience at it. So over time, you become better. What do we listen for? That's a really tricky one. There's loads of answers, you can say to people, and there's quite a lot of people out there who think, well, if it sounds good, it is good. And to a certain extent that's true, but it's for us, we're actually aiming for something that reproduces the original source material as honestly as possible, without embellishing it. Now, because hi-fi and televisions and all of those things are in reality a million miles away from actually being able to do reality, even the very best, the most expensive kit out there really is a long way away from being lifelike. And it doesn't matter if you spend £10,000, £100,000, they aren't that close to it, which is fine, because what we're here to do is try and judge just how close they can get at their particular price point. So we're after something that's honest, transparent, where instruments sound like what they're supposed to be, where a piano actually sounds like a piano, voices sound as convincing as they can do. And the same applies for picture. We want something that we want to see what the director intended. And sometimes some films like Guardians of the Galaxy, which we use an awful lot, it's really bright, it's really vivid, it's a comic book film, so that's what the color palette is, and and that's fine. But what we do is we make sure that we try enough different material to judge all aspects of a product. So when it comes to movies, we'll use Guardians, but then we'll use something like 1917, which is much more natural in its color palette. Then you can look at things like skin tones, grass colors, the things like that, where it's much easier to judge whether something is closer to real or not. And same with music. We'll pick large scale orchestral music, we'll pick rock, pop, hip hop, everything, because our readers listen to all sorts, and the products we recommend are the products that actually work well across all genres of music and films. We're not after something that just works well in just one small niche situation. It is all-round talent we're after, and those are the products that we recommend.
Yeah. So you've touched on a few of the discs and the types of content we use. Can we give just finally some examples of some classic test tracks or films that we use a lot?
Yeah, certainly. We use an awful lot of Hans Zimmer. It's actually quite embarrassing, I reckon. But the reason we use it is that we're trying to use music that a large proportion of our readers would have come across. There's no point in going to an exotic piece of classical music that only a handful of people have ever even heard. Because what's the point? You're trying to give an example. So we try and use really mainstream classical where we can. So Hans Zimmer, so his soundtracks, things like The Dark Knight, everyone knows the Gladiator music, Inception, all those kind of things are we just use it so much. And then equally, we try things like Oliver Arnolds, which is a lot more subtle, which is kind of smaller scale, like I like to call it neoclassical music, which is great. And then we go all the way to the likes of Jay-Z and Nirvana and Nina Simone. You name it, we tend to use those. But things like Hans Zimmer and Nina Simone are probably one of the things that we use the most.
Yeah, I think we've all over the years we've been doing this sort of built up a sort of catalogue of test discs that we use. But we're also all massive music and film fans, and so one of the greatest joys you get as a reviewer is when you're given a new product, and one of the first things you tend to do is set that product up, and if it's a piece of hi-fi, you just play your music, whatever it is you're listening to at the time, a latest album by someone, or your old favorites, and you can legitimately just sit there and listen to your favorite music or the most recent music for a few hours, and that is great for getting just a sense of a product before you get into the test tracks that we always use. And it is important to it is important to balance listening to new stuff and just doing some sort of fun listening with using the test tracks that we use, because those test tracks that we use regularly, we know what they're supposed to sound like. We know what they sound like. We know what they've sounded like on, the 50 previous products that we've done. And so that again sort of lends into that consistency, doesn't it? And it's the same with films. When we're testing TVs and AV kit, we've got the list of sort of test discs does kind of get updated fairly regularly, but there are sort of classics that we go to. I'm still using the Looper Blu-ray and the old Fargo DVD, which are really hard discs for a TV to display correctly. But yeah, I mean, you touched on a couple that we use a lot these days. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is just it's got some really tricky motion at the start. It's got lots of bright colors. It's a really sort of pristine image. That's a very good test disc. 1917, as you say, is much more naturally balanced and has genuinely the most challenging sort of motion that I've seen in ages. So if you're somebody who's not sure about motion processing, not sure how to set up your new TV in terms of its motion processing, that is a disc to use, because it's got a balance of stuff that's very sort of unpredictable for a TV to get right, but it's also got some very tricky pans. So that's a good one. And Blade Runner 2049 is every TV and AV system's worst nightmare. It's a fantastic disc that combines a lot of dark areas with a lot of brightness. So it's a great test of contrast. Very tricky motion in it, and some of arguably the trickiest soundtrack to get right. It really is the deep bass in that soundtrack. It really is a nightmare for most TV speakers, as you can probably imagine, because most TV speakers are tiny. So yeah, those are three discs I'm using a lot at the moment. But as I say, we do update that list fairly regularly when we find something new and good that creates an interesting challenge. While also, as I say, going back to the classics that we know so well, because they're part of the testing process. They help us more easily get to the core pros and cons of whatever it is we're testing.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks guys. I think that was really good. Hopefully everyone who's watched has enjoyed that, and that's given them a really good idea of how we test and exactly what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve with What Hi-Fi Reviews. Thanks.